when you suddenly realize that the metaphorical rug can be pulled from under your feet quite quick at any point. It takes you into some pretty...
Everything seemed normal in the palace until William stopped the meeting mid-sentence. A truth hit him like lightning, shaking the trust he had in everyone around him. Faces he believed were loyal suddenly seemed full of secrets, and history itself felt at risk. The walls of tradition couldn't protect what he just learned. Who hid the truth? What could this mean for the crown? Join us as we dive into the shocking moment no one saw coming. A routine meeting behind gilded doors. This meeting had been on the calendar for some time, written neatly among many other obligations that filled the days of royal life. On paper it looked simple and routine, nothing dramatic and nothing unusual. Chairs were arranged perfectly around the long polished table, documents were placed in neat stacks, and glasses of water caught the soft morning light. Everything was prepared to reflect calm, order, and control, the three things the palace valued above all else. Prince William was expected at any moment, and his presence alone changed the atmosphere. Even before he arrived, the room felt more serious, more alert. As the future king, every movement he made carried meaning, whether he intended it or not. This meeting was meant to be another step in his long journey of duty, another responsibility carried with quiet strength. When William entered the room, there was no dramatic pause and no need for attention. He moved with confidence shaped by years of public life, his expression calm and composed, his posture straight and controlled. To anyone watching, he looked exactly as he was expected to look, steady, focused, and ready to proceed. Nothing about him suggested trouble or doubt, yet beneath that polished surface, something did not feel right. He took his seat smoothly and without hesitation, placing his attention on the table before him. Around him, others settled in as well, adjusting their papers, straightening their jackets, and fixing their expressions into neutral masks. These were people who understood the palace rules well, people who knew how to appear relaxed, even when tension quietly filled the air. At first glance, everything felt normal, almost too normal. The kind of normal that came from years of repeating the same rituals until they felt automatic. Yet sometimes, routine itself could be unsettling, especially when it felt like it was hiding something beneath it. William felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest as he sat there, a quiet pressure that had no clear source. He had learned long ago how to ignore such feelings. Duty always came first. Emotions were pushed aside and questions were saved for later. That was how he had been raised, and that was how the monarchy survived. William glanced down at the documents placed in front of him. They appeared straightforward, filled with familiar language and carefully chosen words. Nothing jumped out at him, nothing raised immediate concern, yet the uneasy feeling remained. It was the kind of feeling that told him something important was missing, or worse, something had been kept from him. The palace was built on tradition, but it was also built on silence. Not every truth was spoken aloud, and not every decision was shared equally. Over time, secrets became part of the structure, hidden behind polite smiles and official statements. William understood this better than most, yet understanding did not always make acceptance easier. This meeting, meant to be routine, was already beginning to feel different. The order and calm the palace worked so hard to maintain felt fragile, like glass that could crack with the slightest pressure. William did not yet know why, but instinct told him that this was not just another entry on the schedule. Nothing had officially begun, no words had been spoken, and no decisions had been made, yet something had already shifted. The balance between duty and trust felt uncertain, and the calm that filled the room only made the tension beneath it more powerful. Prince William sat quietly, unaware that the normal path of the day was already breaking apart. The palace believed it was in control, but control was an illusion, especially when truth waited patiently in the shadows. And as the meeting stood on the edge of beginning, a revelation was moving closer to William, one that would force him to stop everything and change the course of what was supposed to be just another ordinary day. A whisper that changes everything. The room had just settled into quiet expectation when it happened. A private message arrived for William, unseen by anyone else. It was brief, almost casual in its wording, but the weight of it hit him like a sudden chill. He felt the paperless note, the words flashing on the small device in his hand like a thunderclap in a still room. The message was only a few lines long, but it carried a truth that no one intended for him to know. A truth that would change everything. At first he stared at it, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him. Could this really be true? Could the words really mean what he thought they meant? For a heartbeat, he imagined dismissing it, ignoring it, pretending it was nothing. But instinct told him otherwise. This was real, and it was dangerous. The palace suddenly felt smaller. The walls, once protective, now seemed like barriers closing in on him. The chandeliers above, the polished floors below, the gilded tapestries around him, they all pressed down with an oppressive weight. Every rustle of paper, every soft step of a servant, every quiet murmur of a courtier sounded sharper, more significant. Secrets had always existed here, woven into the very fabric of the palace, but this secret was different. It was personal. It touched him. It touched the future he was meant to inherit. William's mind raced. The message revealed betrayals hidden beneath polite smiles. It showed decisions made without his knowledge, choices that affected not just him, but the monarchy, the palace, the people. The words were simple, but the implications were enormous. Every image of loyalty he had carried shattered, replaced with doubt, suspicion, and the weight of sudden responsibility. He tried to focus on the room, on the meeting that had just begun, but the words replayed themselves in his mind. Courtiers who had seemed trustworthy now appeared in a different light. Their polite gestures, their careful nods, their attentive expressions, they all took on new meaning. Betrayal was subtle but unmistakable once seen, and now he had seen it. William's heart beat faster. He felt a cold tension coil around his chest. He realized that nothing in this room was as it seemed. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully prepared document could hide another layer of truth. The palace, once a place of control and order, had become a stage for secrets. And he, the prince, had become the audience to a drama no one had wanted him to witness. He folded the message back into his hand, the words still burning in his mind. The meeting could continue. The courtiers could speak, but he could not pretend. The whisper of truth had already entered his world, and once a whisper became known, it could never be silenced again. At that moment, William realized that the palace he thought he knew had shifted forever, and that the next steps he would take might define not just his own future, but the fate of the monarchy itself. The truth no one meant him to know. The truth did not hit William all at once. It slowly took shape in his mind as he sat there, quiet and still, surrounded by people who looked calm and prepared. The note he had read was not the whole story. It was only the door. Behind it was something much bigger, something that had been building for a long time without him knowing. As the room stayed silent, William's thoughts moved back through recent weeks and months. Moments he once ignored now felt important. Meetings that ended too quickly, decisions that seemed finished before he had a chance to truly weigh in, answers that sounded polite but empty. Back then, he trusted the system. He trusted the people. He believed honesty still mattered inside these walls. Now, that belief felt weak. The truth was simple, yet painful. Plans about the future had already been made. Talks had happened in smaller groups. Choices had been agreed on behind closed doors. By the time the information reached William, it was no longer a discussion. It was something he was expected to accept. William stayed calm on the outside, just as he had been taught since he was young. His face showed nothing. His body stayed still. But inside, his thoughts were loud and restless. He did not feel sudden anger. What he felt was deeper than that. It was disappointment. It was the quiet hurt that comes when trust slips away. The palace often spoke about unity and working together. It spoke about respect and shared duty. But unity only worked when people were honest. Respect only worked when everyone was included. What William now saw was a pattern where information was shared only when it felt safe, and where control mattered more than openness. The room felt smaller than before. The air felt heavier. William looked around the table, not accusing anyone in his mind, but questioning them. Who knew more than they said? Who agreed to stay silent? Who believed this was the right way to handle things? The truth had not been hidden only to protect feelings. It had been hidden to manage outcomes. William understood the reason, even if he did not like it. The palace wanted calm, it wanted stability, it wanted to avoid drama. But calm built on silence never lasted. Sooner or later, the truth always found its way out. His thoughts turned to the crown, not as something shiny or powerful, but as a heavy responsibility. Being a future king was not about looking strong in public. It was about trust, and trust could not survive when the truth arrived late and carefully shaped. The meeting still had not truly started. Papers lay untouched, no one spoke. Yet something had changed. The calm felt thin, like ice that might crack if anyone stepped too hard. William slowly understood that this was not one small decision. It was part of something larger. A path had already been chosen. He was expected to walk it quietly and without resistance. That hurt more than the decision itself. He had always known that leadership meant compromise, but compromise meant being part of the process. Being told last felt like being pushed aside. And in a family built on image and loyalty, being pushed aside was dangerous. The old portraits on the walls seemed to watch him closely now. They had seen moments like this before. Times when silence mattered more than honesty. Times when family and power became tangled together. William shifted slightly in his seat. It was a small movement, but it matched the change inside him. He was no longer just sitting through another meeting. He was facing a choice. The truth had changed everything. It removed comfort and replaced it with responsibility. William now knew that this meeting was not really about plans or paperwork. It was about whether he would accept being managed quietly, or whether he would finally step forward and claim his voice. And as the room waited in silence, William understood one clear thing. What he had learned could not be ignored. Staying quiet might keep the peace for a short time, but it would cost much more in the end. The next move would not come from tradition or protocol. It would come from him. And whatever he chose to do next would shape everything that followed. William breaks the unwritten rule. The moment stretched longer than it should have, quiet and tense, like the palace itself was waiting to see what William would do next. He sat there with the folded note beside him, his hands resting calmly on the table, his face still and controlled. To anyone watching, he looked the same as always, steady and prepared. Inside, however, the weight of the truth pressed harder with every passing second. This was the part no one talked about when speaking of duty, the part where rules collided with reality. The palace lived by unwritten laws just as much as written ones, and one of the strongest was silence. Meetings followed a rhythm, a careful order that was never meant to be broken. You listened, you waited, you accepted. You did not stop the flow. William felt that rule clearly now, sitting heavy in the room like the portraits on the walls. He had followed it his whole life. He had been trained to respect it, protect it, and never challenge it in public. Yet the truth he now carried made that rule feel hollow, almost unfair. The meeting was finally beginning to move forward. Papers were touched, heads turned slightly. The calm, rehearsed motion returned as if nothing had happened, as if the truth William now knew did not exist. That was when something inside him shifted. He realized that if he stayed silent, the palace would take that silence as agreement. The plans would move forward, the decisions would stand, and the truth would be buried again, neatly and politely under layers of tradition. Silence would be easier, silence would be safer, but silence would also change something inside him forever. William straightened in his chair, not quickly, not dramatically, but with purpose. The movement was small, yet it was enough. The room sensed it before it understood it. The steady rhythm faltered. Attention turned toward him, drawn by something unspoken. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He simply broke the flow and the meeting stopped. The effect was immediate. The quiet became heavier. Hands froze where they were. Eyes lifted fully now, no longer pretending to focus elsewhere. This was not how things were done. This was not expected. The unwritten rule had been crossed. William remained calm, his expression firm but controlled. There was no emotion on display, yet the seriousness of his presence filled the room. This was not an outburst, it was a decision. The palace had trained him well, but it had also taught him something else without meaning to. It had taught him when silence protected peace and when it protected avoidance. This moment fell into the second truth. He made it clear without saying a word aloud here that the meeting could not continue as planned. The weight of that decision settled across the table. No one rushed to fix it. No one tried to smooth it over. The pause itself spoke loudly enough. Some faces showed surprise. Others tightened slightly as if bracing for impact. A few remained unreadable, their calm expressions working harder than before. Everyone understood the seriousness of what was happening, even if they did not yet understand why. This was not just a pause in a meeting. It was a pause in tradition. William felt the full weight of his role in that moment. Not the title, not the future crown, but the responsibility to speak when silence became harmful. He knew this choice would ripple outward. There would be questions later, reactions behind closed doors, quiet judgments. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that he had chosen honesty over comfort. The palace thrived on control, on keeping everything smooth and predictable. William's action had disrupted that balance. The calm that once filled the room now felt fragile, like glass with a crack running through it. No one moved to continue. The meeting remained suspended, caught between what it was meant to be and what it had become. The truth had changed the rules, and everyone in the room felt it. William did not feel relief, he felt resolve. Breaking the unwritten rule came at a cost, but so did staying silent. In this moment, he understood that leadership was not about waiting for permission. It was about knowing when waiting caused more harm than action. The palace had expected routine, it had expected obedience. What it received instead was a quiet refusal. And as the room sat frozen in that pause, one thing became clear to everyone present. This meeting would never return to its original purpose. The future had shifted, not with loud words or raised voices, but with a single calm decision to stop pretending. Shock, silence, and faces that could not hide. The pause William created did not fade away quickly. It stayed in the room, thick and heavy, settling over everyone like a shadow that refused to move. What had once been a calm and controlled meeting now felt uncertain, as if the floor beneath it had shifted without warning. No one spoke. No one moved. The palace was used to silence, but this kind of silence felt different. It was not peaceful. It was uncomfortable. People around the table reacted in small ways, ways that would mean nothing to an outsider but everything inside these walls. Some avoided looking at William altogether, choosing instead to focus on their papers or the polished surface of the table. Others lifted their eyes slowly, surprise clear in their expressions before they could hide it. A few stiffened in their seats, their calm faces tightening just enough to show strain. This was not how meetings ended. This was not how they were paused. The palace worked best when everything followed a script, when everyone knew their role and stayed within it. William had stepped outside that script, and now the others were left trying to understand how to respond. Shock moved quietly through the room. It was not loud or dramatic. It showed itself in frozen hands, in shallow breaths, in glances quickly exchanged, and just as quickly pulled away. No one wanted to be the first to react. No one wanted to reveal too much. William noticed everything. He noticed the way some people leaned back slightly as if distance could protect them. He noticed the way others leaned forward, as if ready to speak but unsure if they should. He noticed the faces that tried hardest to remain calm because those were often the ones hiding the most. The palace had trained everyone well. Emotions were managed carefully here. Shock was swallowed quickly. Fear was hidden behind polite stillness. Guilt was masked with professionalism. Yet no training could erase the sudden awareness that something had gone wrong. Some people in the room had expected this moment. William could feel it. There were those who had known the truth long before he did. Those who had helped shape decisions quietly, believing it was for the best. For them, this pause felt dangerous. It meant the truth might no longer stay contained. Others looked genuinely confused. They had followed instructions, trusted the system, and assumed everything had been handled properly. Now they were realizing that something important had been kept back, and that realization made them uneasy. The calm faces that once felt reassuring now felt uncertain. Polished confidence cracked in small ways, a tightened jaw, a blink held too long, a breath taken too sharply. These were the signs no one could fully control. William did not accuse anyone, he did not need to. The room itself revealed enough. Silence had a way of exposing more than words ever could. It allowed thoughts to rise to the surface. It forced people to sit with what they knew and what they had chosen to ignore. The portraits on the walls seemed closer now, their painted eyes watching the scene unfold. They had seen moments like this before, times when power shifted quietly, times when truth pressed against tradition and demanded space. For some in the room, fear began to replace shock, fear of questions yet to come, fear of consequences, fear of being seen clearly for the first time. In the palace, being seen too clearly was often more frightening than being wrong. Others felt denial take hold. This pause, they told themselves, would pass. The meeting would resume. Things would return to normal. The palace always found a way to smooth things over. It always had. But something about William's stillness suggested otherwise. He did not look unsure. He did not look like someone who would retreat quietly. His calm felt steady, grounded, and final. That realization unsettled the room more than any raised voice ever could. The silence stretched on, long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. It forced each person to confront their role in what had happened, whether that role was active or passive. Silence did not allow excuses. It did not allow distractions. This was the moment when understanding began to spread. The truth was no longer just William's burden. It hovered over the table, shared by everyone whether they wanted it or not. The palace could no longer pretend that this was just another routine meeting. The shock slowly settled into something heavier. Awareness that the balance had shifted. Awareness that trust had been tested. Awareness that the next steps would matter far more than the plans already written on paper. No one spoke, yet everything had been said. And as the room remained locked in that uneasy quiet, one thing became clear to all of them. The pause William created was not temporary. It was the beginning of something the palace could not easily control, and whatever came next would force the truth fully into the open, a private confrontation behind closed doors. The meeting did not continue. That much became clear without anyone needing to say it out loud. The pause had stretched too far, and the air in the room had grown too heavy to pretend everything was fine. Slowly and carefully, the room began to empty. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Papers were gathered with hands that were not as steady as before. Faces stayed polite, but eyes avoided one another. William remained where he was, calm and still, even as the room changed around him. When the doors finally closed, the silence felt different. It was no longer shared. It was private. And private moments inside the palace often carried the most truth. Only a small number of people remained, those who mattered most to what had happened and what would happen next. The walls felt closer now, no longer softened by ceremony or routine. This space was meant for honesty, though honesty did not always come easily here. William stood slowly, not rushed, not angry, just certain. The truth he carried had grown too heavy to keep inside. He did not need to raise his voice or show emotion. His presence alone made it clear that this was no longer a discussion that could be delayed or softened. What followed was not dramatic in the way stories often imagined. There were no loud arguments and no sharp gestures. Instead, there was tension that sat thick in the room, filling every quiet moment between breaths. This was the kind of confrontation that hurt more because it stayed controlled. William made it clear that he knew more than he had been told. He made it clear that decisions had been made without his full knowledge, and that trust had been damaged because of it. His words were calm, but they landed firmly. There was no space left for denial. At first there was hesitation, careful responses, soft explanations shaped to sound reasonable. The palace was skilled at that. Words were chosen to protect tradition, to protect process, to protect people. But William did not step back. He listened. But he did not accept answers that danced around the truth. Slowly, the full story began to surface. Plans had been discussed quietly, shaped in private meetings, and agreed upon before they ever reached him. Some believed they were protecting him from pressure. Others believed they were protecting the institution itself, and some simply followed along, trusting that someone else had the full picture. Hearing it spoken out loud made everything feel heavier. What had once been hidden behind polite silence now stood in the open, stripped of its careful packaging. The truth was no longer gentle. It was clear. William felt a deep sense of disappointment settle in him, heavier than anger could ever be. These were people who spoke often of loyalty and unity, yet when it mattered most, they had chosen control over honesty. That choice hurt more than any single decision ever could. The room felt thick with emotion, though very little of it showed on the surface. Guilt flickered briefly across some faces. Others held themselves stiffly, as if bracing against judgment. No one looked comfortable. No one felt victorious. William spoke not as someone seeking power, but as someone seeking respect. He made it clear that being future king did not mean being managed quietly or informed last. It meant being trusted fully, especially when decisions shaped the future. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, just a steady truth spoken clearly and without apology. For a moment, no one responded. The silence returned, but this time it felt earned. It allowed the truth to settle, to sink into the room and into the people standing there. Silence, when used this way, could no longer hide anything. Some offered explanations that sounded more honest now, stripped of careful polish. Others admitted they had believed they were doing the right thing, even if they now saw the cost. The palace did not like mistakes, but they happened all the same, often wrapped in good intentions. William listened. He did not interrupt. He let the truth unfold fully because he understood that real change could not happen without it. Yet even as he listened, one thing remained clear in his mind. Trust once broken did not return easily. By the time the confrontation ended, nothing felt settled, but everything felt exposed. The truth had been spoken, and it could not be taken back. The room felt quieter, heavier, and strangely honest. When William finally turned to leave, he did so without drama. The doors closed softly behind him, but the impact of the moment stayed inside. What had been said would ripple outward through the palace, changing how people moved, spoke, and decided. William walked away carrying both the truth and the weight of what came next. The palace had always taught him how to wait. Now it had forced him to learn when waiting was no longer enough. And as he stepped into the quiet corridor beyond, one thing was certain. The truth had changed everything, and there was no returning to how things had been before. The weight of the crown grows heavier. William walked slowly through the long, quiet corridors of the palace. Every step echoed off the polished floors. The chandeliers above glinted in the afternoon light, but even their beauty could not lift the heaviness in his chest. He felt like the walls themselves were watching him, judging him. Everything he had believed about his world, about the people around him, had been shaken. The truth was heavy, heavier than any crown he had ever worn, heavier than the responsibility of leading a country he loved. He paused by a window and looked out at the gardens below. The flowers were perfectly trimmed, the paths straight and clean, and the fountains sparkled. From the outside, the palace looked flawless, calm, and full of order. But inside, William felt chaos. What he had learned in the meeting had changed everything. Loyalty was not what he thought it was. Decisions that affected the monarchy had been made without him, and whispers of betrayal now echoed in every memory of past meetings, every quiet smile he had accepted as genuine. The burden of being a prince, of being next in line, pressed down on him. It was not just about wearing a crown or attending events. It was about knowing who could be trusted and who could not. It was about making decisions that could alter history. Every choice mattered, and right now, every choice felt painful. He thought about the people in that meeting, the ones he had trusted. Some faces had shown guilt too late, and some had tried to hide their intentions. How could he ever look at them the same way again? He walked into a small study that was usually quiet and private. Here he could think without interruption, though his mind raced so fast that thinking felt impossible. He imagined the crown, the jewels, the ceremony, the duty. The weight of it was more than gold or silk, it was responsibility. expectation, and a history he could not escape. And now the crown felt heavier because of the human cost, because of the lies he had uncovered. William thought about what his father and grandmother might have done in his place. He thought about the long line of kings and queens, each one carrying burdens that the world would never see. History might remember them for victories, for diplomacy, for power. But it would never remember the loneliness, the moments of heartbreak, the quiet hours when the crown felt more like a prison than a privilege. He sat at a heavy desk, hands pressed to the polished wood. He remembered each whisper, each secret, each betrayal piece by piece. It was like a puzzle that no one had wanted him to solve. And now that he had, the image it created was sharp, cruel, and unavoidable. The palace he had always known as a home suddenly felt like a stage full of masks. Who was real? Who was hiding something? These questions would not leave him. Even as he struggled, William knew he had a choice. He could pretend nothing had happened, carry on as before, and keep the palace's fragile peace. Or he could act, even if it meant rocking the walls he had always relied on. Being a future king was not just about appearances or tradition. It was about courage, about standing up to uncomfortable truths, and about making decisions that would shape the future of his country. His reflection in the window stared back at him. The man who looked calm on the outside felt everything on the inside. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, they all mixed together, forming a heavy weight that only he could bear. And yet, he also saw a spark of strength, strength that would not let him be fooled again, strength that would guide him through the choices ahead. As the light shifted and the shadows of the palace stretched across the floor, William knew the world outside was unaware of the storm inside these walls. The weight of the crown was heavier than ever, and yet he had no choice but to bear it. Every step he would take from now on would carry the memory of this day. Every decision would be influenced by the truth he had uncovered. He rose from the desk, straightening his back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new revelations. The burden of the crown would not lighten, but he was learning to carry it in his own way. And maybe, just maybe, this weight would make him a better king. A king who knew both the glory and the pain of his position. The palace was silent now, but William's mind was not. And deep down, he knew the hardest part was not over. There were more truths waiting, more secrets hiding in corners he had yet to see. As he prepared to face another day, William could not shake the feeling that the next revelation would be the one that changed everything, forever. A palace forever changed. The palace never returned to its usual calm. After the halted meeting, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if even the walls had absorbed the tension. Staff whispered in quiet corners, careful not to be overheard. Courtiers moved differently, slower, more cautiously. Some glanced at William with new suspicion, some with worry, some with guilt they could no longer hide. The palace was still beautiful, polished, and grand, but beneath the surface, nothing would ever be the same. William moved through the halls with a quiet authority. He was no longer just a participant in the routines of royal life. He had seen too much, learned too much, to act as if nothing had happened. Every glance, every conversation, every decision carried the weight of what he now knew. The palace was a kingdom of appearances, but he had glimpsed the truth beneath them, and the truth had changed him. In the weeks that followed, alliances shifted quietly but noticeably. Some courtiers who had seemed untouchable now avoided certain rooms. Others whispered behind closed doors, questioning loyalties and making cautious moves. Even the most polished staff could not hide their unease. The palace had always been a place of order, but now it pulsed with uncertainty. A single glance could convey suspicion. A smile could hide a threat. Nothing was certain anymore. William himself felt the change in every moment. He could no longer trust the easy smiles or polite words he had once accepted. Every meeting, every decision, every announcement was now filtered through the lens of the truth he had uncovered. The future of the monarchy, which had once felt like a clear path laid out for him, now felt tangled with secrets, betrayals, and choices he had never imagined making. Even the ceremonial events, which once brought comfort in their predictability, now carried tension. The glittering balls, the formal dinners, the official visits, All were reminders that the palace's surface calm could hide storms beneath. William noticed the smallest shifts in demeanor, the briefest flickers of guilt or hesitation. The palace had always been a theater, but now he understood that the actors were as real as the scripts they followed, and sometimes the scripts were lies. He walked alone one evening through a quiet gallery, the portraits of kings and queens staring down at him from golden frames. They had ruled with power, with strategy, with the weight of history on their shoulders. William realized that he, too, would have to navigate this world carefully. The palace would never forget what had happened, and neither could he. Every decision he made now would ripple through the halls, through the people, through history itself. The truth he had learned would not disappear. It would linger in every corridor, in every whispered conversation, in every careful arrangement of papers and schedules. It would shape the palace, shape the monarchy, and shape him. And in a way, it gave him power. Not the easy power of command, but the deep, hard power that comes from knowing reality as it is, not as it appears. Still, the weight was heavy. Even with clarity, William felt the ache of betrayal, the sting of disappointment, and the loneliness of responsibility. Leadership was not a crown or a title, it was a burden, and sometimes the heaviest burdens were the ones no one else could see. The palace was forever changed, and he was changed with it. Yet in the quiet of the night, when the halls were empty and the chandeliers shimmered in the candlelight, William also felt a spark of resolve. He would face the palace as it now was, not as it had been. He would make the decisions necessary, protect the monarchy, and navigate the treacherous waters of truth and loyalty. The palace could no longer hide its cracks, but he could choose how to walk through them. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning. Secrets were still buried, whispers still waiting to be uncovered, and choices still looming ahead. The palace had changed forever, but so had he. The monarchy, the people, and the future were all entwined with the truth now, and William would never turn away from it again. The palace had survived centuries of power and intrigue, but what William had uncovered hinted at a storm still to come, one that could shake the very heart of the monarchy itself. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.